Well, welcome. My name is Tamara with Love in a Big World, and this is the Love in a Big World webinar that we host on a regular basis to support you as professionals in your growth and learning. Today, my guest is my friend Armando Garza from YouScience, and I'm so pleased that we can talk. For those of you who were privy to our conversation prior, we have updated on all things Corona, and it's really a great segue into our current conversation. So welcome again to Crystal and Lauren, to Cindy and Trish. We're so glad that you're here. And I'm sorry for my dog in the background in the room. I don't know how loud it is for you, but he thinks that he should join us today. So Armando, would you please start us off by telling us a bit more about you and your work, and then we'll dig into our conversation today.
Sure, great. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks for hosting today. Glad that we're able to have a few guests from across the U.S. I've lived in and or visited many of the states that you guys are coming from today, so we'll have some good, interesting stories. But quick background on myself is I was a nuclear engineer in the Navy, came from the Naval Academy, and decided that Homer Simpson wasn't who I wanted to be. And at the time, I didn't really know it, but I was looking at going into medical school or business school. And being the first in my family, first generation in the US, didn't have any role models to tell me to get into medical school. So I decided to go the business route. And fast forward now, 20 years later, I come to work for a company called YouScience. And what we do is we use aptitudes, or we take real measures of your natural abilities, uncover those talents, and then direct you to careers for which you have natural gifts. And in doing so, what I uncovered about myself is that I actually do have the aptitude to be a doctor. And so while I may be in the wrong place, I'm actually in the right place, meaning I'm here to talk to you about how we uncover your students' talents and help better direct them to educational programs that they have available to them that they may never have thought about before.
Great. Thank you. And I have to say, my kids are now 22, 17, and 14. And Armando and I have been talking, it's been about a year now, because so much of the work that we do overlaps. And my kids, my 17-year-old and my 14-year-old, actually have used YouScience in their schools. And then we've also done a little bit of digging more at home. And it's amazing how spot on the analytics are. I mean, it really showed a lot about my kids and affirmed my mom's sense about who they are and where they're headed. So I'm a big supporter of the work that you do. So today we want to talk about the problem that we're seeing. You touched on it a little bit, the problem that we're seeing in education, specifically with middle school, high school, and how they're looking forward to or not looking forward to career development, and then also offer some solutions to that. So can you explain a bit more about the challenges that our middle school and high schoolers are facing when they're thinking about their futures?
Yeah, wow, and there's several. I think the bigger one is in education. Most of the departments of education have an assigned curriculum or learning pattern that they have to do, right? And it's usually legislated. And it says, hey, if you're in 6th to 8th grade, you have to do a career interest inventory. And what happens is that the students will take those, and it'll tell them, in my case, back when I was, back then, it told me to be a circus clown, which probably isn't far from the truth. But the reality is, I have other talents. And so when you're doing that exercise, many of the students don't believe their results because it's a 10-minute survey. And what happens then is they're asked to then create this 4-year plan that's supposed to get them from middle school to post-secondary or to job. And a lot of times that career choice and what they've planned to do doesn't carry with them all the way through. So for example, if I've got circus clown and that's, my top career that I want to do, there really isn't a pathway for me as I move into secondary, and those results typically aren't handed over between when I move from my middle school into my high school, despite the fact that we're in the same district. And so you kind of have these different exercises and activities going around or going on where we're trying to help students identify and figure out what they should be when they grow up. And then when you overlay that with kind of what they know, or what they've been exposed to, most students have, if you're looking through a straw, that's kind of a 7th or an 8th grader looking at the world of opportunity, right? Sure, they can see some things, but it's a very narrow scope. And even when they bring in references of what their parents do, or even grandparents or aunts and uncles, or even their friends' parents, their scope is still very small. And so they're limited as well, not only by the tools that are being used, the process that's being used, but really by their own environments.
So what are some of the other factors? Or let me ask it this way. How much does economics impact that narrow view that kids may have of their world and their future?
Yeah, great question. So what we've seen in some data, and we've now done, we've got almost 1 million students that we've actually looked through their data, and we've separated out urban populations, rural populations. In fact, the University of Missouri did a study with about 7,400 students from 14 high schools across, or 21 high schools across 14 states. And Georgia, and there's my dog, the Georgia Governor's Office of Student Achievement also did a study with 51 schools. And what they found in this is that the simple interest survey, or the standard interest survey, is actually biased, or has a bias against not only young women, but minorities or students from urban or rural settings. Mm. And part of that is predicated off of two things that have to be true for somebody to be interested in something. One, they have to have been exposed. So let's talk about nuclear engineering, right? Part of the reason why I was able to become interested in nuclear engineering is that my father was, after high school, was actually hired to work and help build and construct nuclear power plants in California. And so that's where I become somewhat interested in nuclear engineering, right? Without that background, I probably wouldn't have never gotten interested. So you have to have some exposure. But the second piece, and it's probably more important, and this came from that study at the University of Missouri, is you have to believe that you can actually do this. And if you don't have that fundamental belief, then you're really never going to get to that point, right? And they talk about taking these young students and touring them in a manufacturing facility. And they're sitting there going, man, look, they take these young women and they're saying, look, you can do this, you can do that. And the young women are sitting there going, yeah, this is really cool. In the back of their mind, though, they're saying, but, right? They're trying to figure out reasons, well, but. And so what they said is, if you could first affirm that individual that they have the ability and then expose them to the opportunity, they're not only more likely to try it, they're more likely to excel.
I love that. So I'm jotting down lots of questions, Armando,
Sure.
Because so much of what we're talking about is applicable to our current situations. So if we break this down a little bit, you're talking about ability plus opportunity leads to career achievement, right? College and career achievement. So how does the work that you're doing apply to the current conversation that we're having in our country about equity? And let me be clear, to define equity as not giving everybody the same thing, but giving each person what he or she needs in order to succeed.
Yeah, great question. And I think when we think about that conversation of college or career, we kind of defined it as purpose. When you find that intersection of what you're naturally good at and what you're passionate about, is where you find your purpose, right? Where work doesn't feel like work because you just enjoy what you're doing. You're able to get faster in through the work because it's easier for you, right? So we call that kind of that purpose intersection. So going then to the second part of the question, which is from an equity standpoint, how do we help everybody find their purpose? And what's been, again, interesting in the data, right, is that we know that there are certain, and let's pick we'll pick on in the academic realm, right? We know that the SAT and ACT have some bias because if you haven't been read to by the time you're in third grade or 3 years old, you are already behind in vocabulary and some of the learning. And that's been proven. So what we've done is we've looked at talent as a broader range of abilities. So some of the things that aren't measured directly out of GPA or SAT, ACT scores are really, how do you think? How do you solve problems? How do you put things into logical order? How do you see in 3D? So the exercises, that we use are broader talents that aren't necessarily measured today in school. And so by doing that, what we found is that talent cuts equally across both race and gender. And so when we looked at, and we pulled about 38 careers representing 4 high demand industries in advanced manufacturing, healthcare, IT, and construction. And what we found is that the same percentage of young women as young men, the same percentage of African American, Hispanic, or other ethnicity students had the same percentage as the white students in terms of number of students with the abilities or aptitudes for these different careers. And so when you think about what the benefits there are and what we're able to do then is we're able to help better guide underrepresented students into these non-traditional pathways. So what happens is you've got, let's say Code or Women Who Code, great organization, and they're doing the right thing. But if you're going to go ask a population of 100 young ladies who wants to code, you're not going to find a lot of them that raise their hand, right? And so there's a lot of work that has to get done into finding these young people. Well, I can tell you at the high school right over here, John Overton High School here in Nashville, there are 14 African-American females in the senior class today that have a high aptitude for computer programming. Yet they're not taking any coding classes right now, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a mistake, right? Which is we should be able to get the resources now because we have plenty of resources available, whether it's through Girls Who Code, whether it's here in Nashville, we have the Nashville Technology Council, where we can get these resources and support groups and mentorships, right, for these young ladies and start to help direct them into careers for which they're going to be awesome. They just today don't know it because they may not be interested. And so I think that's the power of what abilities can do is it levels the playing field. Mm-hmm. It helps us identify a larger talent pipeline for communities because instead of IT being 80%, 90% white males, that's not sustainable, right? If you're trying to recruit, that's not sustainable because that's going to become 24% of the total population in the next 4 years. And so you have to recruit more women. You have to recruit more diversity. And by identifying where those people are, we can help do that. And that's, to me, I think the power of using aptitudes or talents and leveling the playing field and driving equity. So.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So I'm listening to all that you're saying, Armando, and I'm thinking, and friends who've just joined us, welcome. Please feel free to let us know who you are, what you do, and where you're coming from. And also, if you have questions for me or from Armando, please go ahead and share those in the chat. But as I'm listening to you, I can't help but think about, what we titled this time together about the SEL and workforce development. And SEL being defined as helping kids identify what's going on in their heads and in their hearts so they can use their hands to build up and not tear down. So you're really doing a lot of work to uncover what is there. I mean, it's like you're digging for buried treasure within the hearts and minds of these kids. And I can see that there'd be such benefit not only for them as individuals, but for the community at large. So what is some of the work that you're doing in order to create the pathway so that kids are not only finding out what their abilities and aptitudes are, but then able to leverage that for career and workforce?
Yeah, good question. So part of what the tool does, right, is it exposes you to these aptitude exercises. And then to your point, you have to do the work. You have to get your hands dirty and do the exercises. And that's when then we get to actually reveal the soul part, the opening your heart part. So in the feedback, there's actually, and all the language is built in an affirmative way. So we don't use scores, right? Because what we've heard is in an academic environment, if a student gets 20th percentile, hey, I've got to either fix it or that's not good, right? And when you're dealing with aptitudes, all that means is that you think differently, right? So in one case, it just means that you actually can see an abstract versus you have to actually see things visually, right? Which makes you better. If you're low in that, it just makes you better at being a psychologist or a philosopher versus somebody who has to use their visual abilities that, they're going to be better in architecture and engineering, and that's okay, right? But the point being is there was a study done by the Governor's Office of Student Achievement in Georgia. And through their analysis, what it showed is that our product gave students hope, purpose, and relevance. And so when you think about that student that's sitting there, because they're getting a 70 in math class every time, and they're sitting there going, man, I'm just not good. Rather than throwing in the towel and not understanding the value of the education, what it does is it gives that student that ability to say, you know what, there are careers out there that I have talents for. It just may not be the doctor, lawyer, right, that everybody around me or all the parents, my parents are saying go do, right? That just may not be my path, and that's okay. And so by identifying these students and their talents and showing them that there are opportunities for them and that they'll get paid, this is how we start to draw the connection with the student. And that's kind of the first piece, is you got to help get them to believe. And I think Maria's kind of comment on that is, they can do it. They believe themselves then that they can do it. And then the second part of that is giving the counselors and teachers and everybody else the tools to help get the right students into the right programs, right? So if you are going to go on a certain path, then it'd be really good for you to start to build skills and knowledge in those areas while you have that opportunity in secondary, right? How do we help connect you then to internships and apprenticeships so that you get real experience, right? And we kind of talk about 3 phases of getting to that employment piece, which is 1, uncovering your talent and identifying what you're good at. The second is getting real skills and knowledge, and demonstrable skills and knowledge to be able to showcase. And then the third is real world experience. How do you get that internship and apprenticeship? Because those are the things that'll start to line you up for that career. And that's part of what we do, which is we connect the community piece. So working with employers in the community, chambers of commerce, as well as our education partners, and taking the 3 of them almost like a 3-legged stool and helping them understand what is the actual talent that exists in their community, and how do we help them put the right resources together to build that. And I think that's the power of what communities can do, particularly, in low social economic urban areas, or even in rural areas, where we're starting to see the benefits of pulling these things together. And I'll give you a couple of stories just to kind of pull it together. One is a young student in inner city Georgia was going through his results with his counselor. And his counselor told us this. And she said the student, when we were getting ready to show careers, kind of had this like look on his face, like scared. And so when she showed him his careers, he just looked relieved and he smiled. And she said, well, what's wrong? And he said, I didn't think I'd match to anything, right? Because again, he didn't feel that self-value, that self-worth for one reason or another, right? And then the ability to him to connect and see that there were all these opportunities for him was very powerful. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to do. And then in the rural communities, what we've started to be able to hear is, how do we recruit different companies, right, to come out here? And so we've been working with a community where they were able to identify that they have a lot of talent in IT, particularly in computer programming. And so the ability to then attract a data center, let's say an Amazon data center, sure, it's only 100, 150 jobs, but when you think about the power that they're going to be using, right, the taxes that they'll be giving back to the city, those are all big economic boosts that community can now leverage and start to build upon. So there's some really cool things out there that can be done.
That's amazing. So there's so much to what you just said. First, I want to start with when you're talking about the different types of abilities and aptitudes, and we're going to open up for questions in just a minute. I'm thinking about Gardner's multiple intelligences, and just the fact that kids need that affirmation that it's not you're smart and you're not smart, but it's you're smart in a different way, that we all have a different type of smart. And it's finding that track where we can best use the gifts and abilities that we've been given to the betterment of the world in which we live. And that's one of the things that I think is, like you mentioned, that that young man down in Georgia, that's something that we can all celebrate. What I'm wondering, Armando, is given our current crisis, given the fact that we're living in the day of COVID and the day of civil unrest, how do we help kids? How do we help kids really latch on to this hope, purpose, and relevance that you're talking about? And how do we also, and I know these are big questions, but how do we also leverage the changes that we're seeing in our educational system in order to help kids bridge that gap? Because one of the things that I keep hearing about and reading about is, learning loss because of COVID. And I'm just going, I don't know if I buy that. Yeah. I'm kind of on the other side going, what can we learn from what we're currently experiencing that's actually going to empower and prepare our kids for this ever-changing world? So and I know, again, this is a very complex question, but what are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're starting to see those questions be challenged. So think about higher education, right? So what is the value of higher education if I'm stuck in my dorm room doing online learning, right? Is it worth the $20,000, $30,000 a year tuition? And so I think those questions are starting, and I think you're going to start to see them trickle down even into secondary and even maybe into middle school, right? Middle school is a little bit more structured, whereas when you think about in high school, you've got electives, right? You've got CTE programs, you've got other things. So I do think that students are going to start to question, and they've already done the questioning. It just wasn't as overt, right? If you look at graduation rates, you have students that have selected out of the process, right? Because they didn't feel that there was value. And again, if you're really not good in math or English for the most part, or language, school is frustrating, right? And you get to that theory of relativity. So if you and I are sitting in math class next to each other and you're getting a 96 on everything and I'm getting a 90, and then you go take the SAT and you get a 720 and I get a 700, I'm sitting there going, well, I'm awful in math, right? I just happen to be sitting next to somebody who's better in math, but on a national standard, we're both in the 90 something percentile. And so I think all those things are going to start coming into question. And so when you peel back the onion and you really help somebody identify what they're good at and where their talents are, it's like putting a fish in water, right? It's natural. You feel very comfortable in the environment for which you are now pursuing, you are now doing. I'll give you an example of my son, right? My son, he's now in college, so he's a freshman, but he's the kid that wouldn't pick up a book, wouldn't study. Great, got A's and B's, did well enough. And when he was looking at his YouScience, right, it told him, hey, go be a construction worker or go into the medical field. Those were kind of some of the things he had abilities for. And it's funny when you talk about it and you go, what, how are those related, right? Because we always say, well, if you're not the A/B student with a 30 something on your ACT, you probably can't get to medical school. Well, that's not true, right? Because you have different abilities, different smarts. And so what it came down to for him was he had a thing that happened in school. He got pneumonia his senior year, had a chance to talk to the doctor, and really then came to the conclusion that he was more about his passion, right? Was about helping people. So while he had the aptitude to do a couple of different things, it was really then that intersection of passion, right? And that's how it should come at the end, not at the beginning. And so by doing that, now he feels like he's on that path toward his purpose, right? And so he's now focused. He actually studies now, which is actually funny, right? But he's figured out what it means for him. And so I think, to your point, if students are being left to their own devices for learning, right, where you can't manage them in a classroom from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, and you're going to have to do some online learning, I think it will be important for them to uncover their talents sooner rather than later, identify those areas of passion so that they can start to poke around there. And I think what we'll find is that combination will get students to where they want to be faster, more efficiently. And I think, to your point then, from an economic return, even those people that are been displaced and need reskilling, the same is true for them, right? And I think we can get to that place very fast. And again, I'll leave you with a story on this question. Is in World War II, right? And not to be sexist or anything, but when all the men were leaving to go fight the war, the women and other folks that were left behind, they actually used aptitudes as a way to uncover talents to put them in jobs so that they could build manufacturing capacity faster. Okay, so it was actually based on, what are you good at? Let's get you in that job quicker. And so we've shown that it worked in the past. I do think it'll probably make a resurgence again. What's different this time around is that we've used technology now to make the process easier and more reliable. So instead of having to take a paper-based test or assessment or exercise, it's all digital now. It's all done online in the comfort of your home or in the comfort of a classroom, and you can get your results really quickly. So I think that's probably the big difference of where I see and I think change is coming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. So friends, if you have any questions, please go ahead and add those to the chat. I think, Armando, we've had enough conversations offline to know that you and I are in alignment in many ways philosophically about education and the changes that we see that need to happen. And I, for one, am excited about this current revolution that we find ourselves in. I think it provides an opportunity for incredible innovation. And like you said, an opportunity to help kids find their fit a lot sooner, and also in a protected way, right? So that they're still under the covering of their parents or their loved ones who can provide some of that guidance for other life skills as they're developing their career skills. So I'm just hopeful that if we can embrace the change and not keep thinking, oh, we have to return to the old normal, it's gone. You know, let's embrace where we are and find the new way. And I really believe that the work that you and your team at YouScience are doing is going to be part of that. So, all right, I do thank you, Maria, for your comment about affirming kids and their abilities. I agree. That's what we all need to do, and that's what we're about with Live in a Big World. So, friends, like we always do, we will be sharing the link of this webinar with you so that you can share it with your colleagues. And Armando, if you have any other resources that you would like to share with our audience, I had several emails from people who wanted to join us today but had class. So I let them know that if they were registered, they'd get the information. So if you have anything you want to send my way, I will share it with everyone, and we'll also continue sharing on social. As always, thank you, friends, for joining us. Check out Live in a Big World for our resources and how we can support you, because SEL is more important than ever during these days. And check out YouScience. We'll make sure that you get that link as well. So, and Armando, any closing thoughts before we go?
You know, I was looking, we're actually in several of the different places that our guests are on. So we are in Colorado Springs. We do some work, Arizona, Texas, all over. I think the key thing is, you know, our kids, they really want to do well. You know, they don't wake up every day going, well, how am I going to make today an awful day, right? Everybody always usually wakes up saying, man, I'm going to do something awesome today. And then the day gets in the way of them, right? And it's those frustrations and challenges that if we can help them overcome by giving them that nudge of, you have talent, you have aces, right? You have gifts, and here's the best way to apply your gifts. I think that's really what it's about. And what we've seen in the communities and with the students that we've been helping, it's really powerful. And it's not only powerful for the student, but it actually creates changes in the adults. And I'll leave you again one last story. I know we're running out of time, but this one comes from Mississippi, and I won't share too much of the information, you know, because of FERPA and whatnot. But we have a young gentleman who finished his freshman year, wasn't doing well. And when the counselors got together, they said, you know what, this is one of the students that is on our watch list, might not make it. So the counselor called the father in, and they met and they sat and talked over the summer, and she showed him his YouScience results. And the dad started crying, and he said, you know what? I didn't realize that my student had these talents, these abilities. I just assumed he was going to be like me. And the dad, come to find out, was a truck driver, and he does long hauls all across multiple states. And he takes his son with him. His son sleeps in the back of the truck, you know, leaves at about 5 in the afternoon, comes back at 5 in the morning, showers in a truck stop, and goes to school. And when his dad realized the potential and the talent that his student, actually his son, actually had, he made different concessions for his son to be able to get what he needed so that he could learn and be successful. So, hey, he was going to make him, you know, stay at friend's house, relative's house. He was going to change his truck route. So I think there's power into helping parents understand the talents that their kids have. Because, you know, if you want to break some of the patterns, right? You kind of mentioned it. How do you not go back into your own ways? You need a catalyst. You need something to help you understand that there is something different. There is something bigger for you. And I think that's what it's about. And if we can help people find that and do that, that's really our mission.
Well, thank you for the work that you do every day. And thank you, friends. for the work that you do in the communities around our country and our world. And I do believe wholeheartedly that together we will see a better day for our children and for all of our communities. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time. And love in a big world. Bye-bye.